Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Rod Escaola, and I'm your condominium lawyer with Gowling WLG. And this month, we're going to take a deep dive on reserve fund studies, the big misunderstood out there. How do they work? Why do we have them? What can we use them for? When you think about it, it's probably your biggest expense out there, and simply because it encapsulates all of your expenses related to capital expenditures and so on. So whatever's not operating, it goes into this big vortex for a rainy day. When is the rainy day? Okay, so what I've done done my usual drill. I went out to get some experts to join the Gowling's usual condo geek crew, and you won't be disappointed. So today, being November 3rd, I guess, we're going to introduce them in their Halloween costume. I'm kind of curious to see what they went like as a couple of days ago. And so let me start with the two newbies. New tonight, we have Claudia Demarin from First Service Residential. Hi, Claudia, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Thank you
And,
for having me tonight.
and so what did you go as at Halloween, on Halloween night?
Well, I borrowed my son's costumes from high school, and I was a zombie,
Look at
scaring
that.
all the kids in the neighborhood for sure.
Nice. You should wear those at board meetings. That should be
That's
helpful.
a good thought. I'll
Yeah.
keep that in mind.
So thanks for joining us tonight. And then we have David Heska, not quite new to this, David Heska with WSP. He is my favorite engineer to have on the program after every other engineer that's been on the program, just in case they're watching. And so David, thanks so much for joining us tonight. And so a minute ago, you showed us the candy that you stole from your kids. I hope they're not watching the webinar. What were you wearing for Halloween 2 days ago?
I was a construction worker with my hard hat on and my reflective vest, Rod.
Look at that. Thank you. That's fantastic. If you have pictures, send them our way. And people at home, if you want to chat about your costumes, feel free to put it in the chat. I love reading those afterwards. And so we have sad news to report today. We don't have condo twins today. Our condo twin tonight is a Lone Ranger because David is drinking Vino Verde in Portugal, the safest COVID country out there at the time of his departure. And so hopefully he's watching us from the coast somewhere, eating cod and chips. And so Graham McPherson, what did you go as a couple of days ago?
This year for Halloween, it's really too bad that Claudia and I weren't together because I also was a zombie this year. So next year we're gonna have to we'll do the matching costumes again, and we'll see if we can make a show of it.
Oh my goodness, what happened to your beard? I didn't get the memo about the
I was
beards.
a zombie without a beard, indeed. So as it turns out, I do have a face underneath. This is it. I know you were expecting more of a Chuck Norris look, but this is what you get.
Oh, nice. And so the next one on our panel, Graham shaved his beard, but we have with us someone growing a Movember mustache. Jose Delonchamp from Des Services. You're raising funds this year again.
I am. I'm a Mo sister again this year for the third year in a row. And that's what I was disguised as for Halloween. I was the grumpy den mother as usual, with my glasses down low, nagging everyone, but with the addition of a mustache coming in.
Wow, nice. So as soon as I'm done trying to figure out how to navigate this webinar, I'm going to put a link, folks, in the chat room. And if all of you gave a couple of pennies, a couple of dollars, it would go a long way to help Jose push her fundraising a bit further. So I'm going to put the link there for you folks to encourage her in her mustache growing endeavor.
I appreciate that.
So you know how it is. Keep the chat alive. Feel free to. We don't really moderate the chat too much, and so just keep it keep it PG-13. But put your questions, put your comments. It's great to hear and read you. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A because we lose sight and we lose track a bit of the chat. What else do I need to go over with my housekeeping? Well, you know how it is, usual disclaimer. For those of you watching this from home, we are broadcasting from Ontario, so we are focused on Ontario legislation. This broadcast is as accurate as it could be as of November 3rd, 2021. So if you watch this later, you may need to sort of adapt to some of the information you'll get. Keep in mind that the information we provide tonight is of general nature. You need to go and pay for advice. You need to go and get your experts, your property managers, your engineers, your lawyers to go and look at your specific situation to give you advice that's worth what you paid for. So tonight, the advice you get is worth what you paid for. It's free. Okay, so I think that's it. This session is being recorded. I'm going to upload it in a couple of days. Please don't email to ask me when I'm going to do this. I'm not the one doing it. I'm doing it as quickly as I can. Usually by the weekend, it should be up and running and you'll be able to watch it on demand in a loop. Okay, I think that's about it. Oh, before I forget, two announcements. Two learning opportunities coming down the pike. So for the condo directors, Ottawa has a condo directors group. On November 18th, we're going to have our meeting. We are going to focus again on reserve fund studies, but it's going to be a bit more intimate to allow more interaction. And so if you are a condo directors group member, you will get an invite. If not, maybe you want to register to try to become a member, but you have to be a serving director. And don't miss this out. CAI, backed by popular demand, CAI has relaunched its virtual chair certification. It's a 2-day event. Well, it's not 2 days, but it's a workshop over 2 days, so 2 segments on November 25th, November and December 2nd. Tons of things to learn about and to help you sort of master chairing in this virtual world. So November 25th, December 2nd, $25 for CAI members and $75 for non-members. Why would you be a non-member? Become a member and then get the discount. So there it is. Let me just now go back to my slides. Sorry, I'm sort of looking sideways here. A quick update, COVID update. I don't want to spend too much time on this. And so let me just turn my screen like this. Very briefly, a question we often get is, what about the announcement that Doug Ford made a couple of 10 days ago? Does that change anything? And the quick answer is it really doesn't change anything. It's sort of a projection toward the future. In January, there may be changes. But for now, masks continue to be required indoors, usual exceptions. I'm not going to read all of this. It's going to be uploaded on the web on Condo Adviser. You'll be able to download the presentation, but masks continue to be required indoors with the usual exceptions. Public gathering, indoor 25, outdoor 100. COVID screening at all your entrances, you should have an invitation for everybody to screen, and you should be actively screening those who work at your condo. Gym and fitness amenities can be reopened, or you could keep them closed if for whatever reason your condo corporation is of the view that it is safer and to keep them closed. That's also permitted, but you could open them. There's a couple of restrictions or conditions, including self-screening, tracing information, safety plan, et cetera, so keep that in mind. And what else? A question that I got quite often is, what about elevators? Do we still have to limit it to 2 or 3 or in order to have 2 meters distance? And my question back to you would be, why would you not? Why do you want to have a big party in the elevator now at this stage? But just keep this in mind. The province has not regulated the capacity of elevators. Well, other than TFSA's capacity, I mean, there's a weight limit. But for COVID purposes, there was really no direction from the province, but each public health unit may have put forth a recommendation. In Toronto, it continues to be 2 meter distance. In Ottawa, it continues to be this. I didn't look at all 34 public health units, but that is what you should look at. Look at your public health unit where your condo is located, and that is going to help you figure out what is the recommendation, and you must follow that recommendation. Okay, so that's about it. Vaccination. Well, the only thing I'm going to say about vaccination is that I think the consensus is that condo corps do not have to check vaccination status, but they can, and many do. And right now there is a hidden benefit in checking vaccinations. That, well, the real benefit is that you're making your place safer. But the hidden benefit is that if you opt in to checking vaccination status, you may be able to increase capacity on certain amenities of yours. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and I shouldn't really say that, but I will anyways, because it's just us. The restrictions and the capacity limits applicable to gyms across the province have been lifted because Ontario, in its infinite wisdom, thought, well, we're imposing vaccination check at the entrance, so we don't need to have the capacity limits anymore. However, vaccination check is not mandated in the condos. So condo gyms benefit from the lighter restrictions, but without any of the mandated protections. And that is how Ontario is tackling the situation right now. There it is. I don't think I did as good of a job as Graham. Usually Graham's the one that does this part, the condo update. If you're not really happy with the summary that I gave you, just write Graham and ask him to do it next week, next month. Okay, there it is. Now onto the real topic, reserve fund studies. Graham, you're going to give us the 101 overview, and you're going to be prompted, obviously, by the slides. So let me put the slides that I would like you to cover. So the floor is yours, Graham.
I'm prompted. Well, I'm just going to give the kind of 40,000-foot view of what reserve funds are and what reserve fund studies are. We've got experts here who are far more charismatic and better looking than I am, who are going to be able to give you real useful expertise with their boots on the ground. But in order to get everybody on the same kind of playing field here, I'll give a bit of an overview. So the reserve fund at any condominium corporation is the fund that is used and kept for major repairs and replacements to the corporation's common elements and its assets. And this is separate from its operating fund. They need to be kept in separate places. And the reserve fund, this fund we kind of keep for a rainy day whenever our common elements need to be repaired or replaced, that is contributed to each month by a portion of the monthly common expenses that come in. Now, you may be wondering, okay, so that's great that we keep this big pool of money to do these repairs and replacements, but how do we apply that? How do we know what we need to repair and when? And how do we know how much money it's probably going to cost?
How much money how do we know how much money we save for the reserve fund?
Exactly, yeah. And so that's why the legislators thought of that. And so that's why condominiums have to, every 3 years, they need to do what's called a reserve fund study. And what this does is it determines how much money needs to be in the reserve fund for repairs that are going to need to be paid for in the future. So it basically is made up of two broad things. It's an assessment of the corporation and its assets and common elements and their expected life. And it's an assessment of how much it's going to cost and when to repair and replace these items. The way to think about it is more of a budgetary analysis rather than a work schedule. It's not a schedule that says, the concrete will need to be replaced on this year, and then the windows will need to be replaced on this year. It's more of an itemization of you should expect to require the funding for these types of repairs around this point in time. So it's not about when you do the work, but it's about when you need the funds to do that work.
Okay, perfect. And of course, the purpose of a reserve fund study and the purpose of a reserve fund is to avoid surprises, avoid big, nasty special assessments. Yeah. And so rather than ask the current owners to pay for the windows that others have used for the last 40 years, everybody contributes towards that. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, you have another slide.
Yeah, so there we go. Let's keep going. So like I said, the reserve fund study will cover all of the corporation's components that it'll have to repair or replace. And that study will include the estimates as to when these repairs or replacements are expected to probably need to be paid for. So the windows, for example, the reserve fund study may say, it looks like you're going to want to be prepared to pay X amount of dollars for the windows in X amount of years looking into the future. And it's important to remember that these studies are estimates that are done with the information that the person doing the study has at the time, but they are just that. You know, things can happen that no one expects. Sometimes poor maintenance can lead to earlier malfunctions, or sometimes, you know, acts of God occur and nobody sees it coming. And then the reserve fund study will also recommend the increases that need to be made to the reserve fund contributions for the following 3 fiscal years to ensure that there is enough going forward. We're going to talk, well, the royal we, I'm not going to, but there are multiple types of reserve fund studies. There's the comprehensive reserve fund study, which is, you know, the big shebang where every nook and cranny is looked into. And then there are updated studies based on site inspections and updated studies not based on site inspections. And
okay, but we're going to let David cover that though.
Cool.
Yeah, so just park it for now so we keep moving a bit. And it's your last point is about the horizon is 30 years into the future. You're trying to, at this point, you're trying to budget for that period of time. But
at least.
We're going to talk about that, right? Exactly. Okay, so, something important here. So the definition of what is adequate, because at the end of the day, all of the legislation and the reserve fund studies and all your professionals are going to tell you, you need to have adequate funding in the reserve fund. So what is adequate funding, Graham?
Well, adequate funding, it's not based on how much money you have or how big your corporation is. It's the expected costs of the major repairs and common elements and assets. So adequate, it's a bit, but adequate funding is whatever funding is going to be adequate to do the repairs that are going to need to be done.
Right. Okay, perfect. David, we're now going to turn to you. And so David Heska from WSP is going to walk us through the various types of reserve funds. And so I have a surprise for you, David. I've actually found a reserve fund, and I'm going to put it on the screen, and you're going to help me sort of read that. So that wasn't rehearsed yesterday. But so let's start with the various classes of reserve funds.
Yeah, did you get the slide? If you go to the next one, Rod, is it on there, the timeline? Yeah, so the classes are 1, 2, and 3. As Graham alluded to, class 1 is the most comprehensive study where we turn over every rock and do a site visit as part of a class 1. If a new engineering provider is coming in to do a reserve fund study, then they will do a comprehensive study. Then after 3 years after, the Condo Act requires update without a site visit. So like the example 2022, we do the class 1, 2025, we do the class 3 with no site visit. And then in 2028, we do a class 2. Now, what's the difference between a class 2 and a class 1? We already have the declaration and the bylaws, so we don't have, and the original drawings, so we don't have to review in detail all of those information that would be provided as a comprehensive class 1. But we are, for class 2, coming back to site again, reviewing to make sure how components have changed, what's been updated, what's deteriorated over the past 6 years. And then the cycle just continues, class 3, class 2, class 3, class 2. So the Condo Act states that every 6 years, you need a study that's with a site visit. And then in between that, every 3 years, there needs to be at least a financial update without a site visit.
Okay, and so during this site visit, forget about the comprehensive one, but during your site visits, I mean, do you look under behind every screw? Like how involved is it? I mean, do you check every window? Do you check every brick? How involved is that?
No, we typically complete them depending on the size of the condo. It's done in 1 day, sometimes 2 days if it's a large condo with various common elements and shared facilities. But the purpose of the reserve fund study site visit is to capture a general understanding of the condition of the components. We would recommend as part of budgeting for the reserve fund studies that as the window replacement project approaches, or as a garage repair project approaches, that a more detailed component evaluation for the window specifically is undertaken, and then that evaluation on a future date can be paid for from the reserve fund. But instead of just looking at all the components in 1 8-hour day, in that instance, we'd be looking at only the windows in 1 8-hour day, but that would be paid for separately from a reserve fund study with site visit.
Okay, perfect. And should I go to the next slide at this point?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
there's an example of, actually, I'm going to a board meeting tomorrow afternoon to present this 32 unit condo. This is their notice of future funding, and it states a lot of just their opening balance, their minimum reserve fund expenditure balance, the 50,000. I think we'll get into that maybe a bit more throughout the day, and their interest rate and inflation rate. We have assumed for this condo a 3% interest rate and a 2% inflation rate. I think we're going to talk about that also later on, but it's just a high level. So the good news in this condo's case is kind of row 2, 2022. If you go over to the right side, their percent increase is only 0.34%, which is great. And then it just increases by inflation on after that.
Okay. So I saw a question go by in the chat. The class 1. I mean, you would normally only do this once, or do you do it once at the very beginning, and you would do so whenever you change engineers?
Correct. Yeah, because when the engineer comes in, they won't have the drawings and the bylaws and the declarations, all of that information. A new engineer needs that.
Okay, so this is the surprise for you here. This is what the spreadsheet looks like. You need a magnifying glass to sort of have a look at it, but I wanted to zoom into this one, and maybe you can help me read this. So that's I mean, if you printed it, it would look like this, but let me zoom in here. And so, like, just help me understand how these columns work here. So use any one of these expenses.
Yep. So what they've done is they've taken the typical life cycle of 25 to 30 years and then said, based on when it was last done, how many years of life are left. And that helps to calculate where over on the far right that project is going to occur. And the budget that they have used, they've set the 2018 cost, and then it's been inflated using whatever inflation number this engineer has, 2% or 3%. And that's come up with the 2021 cost. And every time we do an update, we need to check to see, has the cost of parking garage waterproofing actually just gone up, keeping with our 2% inflation number, or have we seen, based on our project experience, that that cost has actually gone up at a greater or a slower rate than that? So
right. And so if I go to the 5th line, for instance, the parking garage, local repairs to traffic coding, blah, 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 I see then there's a 50,000 that appears at 2021, 21-22. Oops, what happened here? And then I see another 50,000 a bit later. So how does that, how do these column works here?
So in this, this was not our WSP report, it's from a different engineering provider. So I'm not exactly sure why the number has, you know what I think it is? I think they've updated it and they've said, this is what we used to use in 2018. And now we've updated our cost and changed it to be $50,000. So as a result of them likely increasing the 4.3A cost from 25 to 50K, that will have resulted in some increased contribution amounts, because all of a sudden now on this new update, the 2021 update, I think is what that's saying is you need to spend an extra $25,000. They've assumed
right
over.
So the way I read it on year 1, which is 21-22, there's an expectation that you should have $50,000 worth of repair, possibly to the traffic coding. Is that fair? Correct. Is that how you?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then I want to look at the bottom of the spreadsheet. So this is at the very bottom of the spreadsheet. There's all sorts of rows here. So how do they kind of work here?
Yes, so in this example, they've taken a summary of each of the projects that have occurred and then added the HST. And I think I just saw in the chat, someone properly commented on some reserve fund studies, the cost for HST is included in the rows above. In this example from a company, they have just taken the sum all the way down of the $117,000 and then added the HST. Another thing you would want to ask your reserve fund study provider is, where is the cost for engineering? Is that included in the project above? That was the $100,000 item for repairing the waterproofing, or is the engineering cost sometimes budgeted somewhere else? And then in total, what it all comes down to is, what's the increase amount? So the reserve fund fee increase there, Rod, you have 2% and then 9% and then 5% and then 5%. And I'm curious to know what it was in 24, 25, 26, if it eventually should get down to be that your reserve fund increases are in line with inflation.
Yeah, I can tell you the following columns are all twos. And
Yes.
the reason why this flagged your interest or piqued your interest is because you see this first year, which is this year, the increase is much higher than the cost of inflation. And so obviously I think that what this tells me is that this corporation needed to catch up. They had a bit of a shortfall, so they needed to catch up, and they've spread it over 3 years. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Okay, so there it is. That's kind of what it looks like. And at the bottom of your chart, you'd be able to see that the first year, 21-22, we're expecting to spend $200,000 and then plus HST. And then it also tells us how much we should have at in the reserve fund. So the expectation is that at the end of this year one, you'd have $1.7 million in this reserve fund. Okay, so that's how we read it.
One more point I'll make here is that the estimated closing balance line is, in this corporation's example, 1.6 million all the way to 2.1 million. Eventually, they're going to have a $1 million project or perhaps a $2 million project, and that balance is going to drop to this minimum balance amount. Whatever you tell your reserve fund study provider engineer, we are comfortable having only minimum balance of 25,000. When our big project happens in 2030 or 2035 and we spend the $2 million, you as a condo need to work with your engineer to decide what's the minimum balance we want in there, because that will help in the formulas to determine what the contribution increases need to be. If you're comfortable with a lower amount, then there's slightly lower contribution increases, but there's obviously a risk in having only a year where you just have 25,000 bucks left in the bank.
So let me ask two questions, and then we'll get the other two speaker on as well. So my first question is, the legislation right now says that the projection is over a period of 30 years. I'm hearing a lot of people doing it over 40 years, more even. I've heard 60 years. So knowing that the minimum is 30 years, what are the benefits of doing it longer, and what's your view on that?
I'm going to pass this right to Claudia. Rod, she was talking about this yesterday in our call. Do you want to have her chime in about?
You on, Claudia?
Well, thank you, David. Throw it at me. The benefit to have a longer term than 30 years, longer than the minimum, is that it gives a picture to the corporation where they're going to be when the projects are going to repeat, when that window project is going to come again, and what funds are required for the project. The downside for that is the board of directors looking at the contributions and saying, well, we really don't want to look that far in advance. Most likely we will not even be going to be around at that time. What do we care? Let's budget as for a short period of time as possible to have the contribution as low as possible. From the perspective of the property management, it is definitely better to have a perspective in the future, to know that the funds, when they're required, they're there. As the projects are coming, there is no need for a special assessment. As we know, as the special assessment is not always viewed as increase of property values.
Right. And so obviously, if you only cover 30 years, you may have a big project on year 31 or year 32. So if you extend it to 40, then you capture more of the expensive projects. And the hope is that you sort of get the repeat of that project. You've changed the door entry now. It's going to last however many years. You're hoping that you're going to capture it by having a longer horizon. David, are you going to sort of give me if you were to land somewhere 30 years, 40 years, 45? Does it matter?
Our typical is 45 years. If clients ask us to shorten it to make it a 30-year window, we do that for them. In some cases, we've done a scenario where it's a 60-year horizon, but I would say where we typically land is around the 45-year mark. But I would encourage directors, ask their provider, can you give us one scenario where it's 30 years and one scenario where it's 45 years, and see how it compares.
Right, wonderful. Another question that was brought up a couple of seconds ago, and this one we're gonna loop in Jose. You were talking, David, about the minimum balance. So obviously, we're seeing here in that chart that we have on the screen, we're seeing what's the balance on year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Some years we spend more money, and if we spend more money, obviously, every time you use money towards an expense, well, then it eats up at your balance. And every single reserve fund has the low point. There's that 1 year where you will have your lowest balance, probably because the year before you've changed all your windows or whatever it is. So obviously the balance fluctuates. And so what is a safe or fair or good minimum balance? And so I'd like to hear both from you, David. What's your kind of take on that? But and from Jose. So David, you want to go first? What's the minimum balance that we should aim for?
It depends on the size of your condo. I've seen some where the minimum balance is $25,000. I've seen some where it's $50,000. I think my example was a 32 unit condo that had a $50,000 minimum balance, and other condos are around $100,000. I think more and more the $100,000 minimum balance, especially for larger condos, is becoming more popular. But for the medium-sized condo, probably $50,000. Jose?
I agree exactly with what you're saying. I think there's no magic number. It's the same as adequate. There's no magic number. It depends on many things. It depends on how many projects you have done yet so far, what is likely to come up. You have to understand, if you keep a 25 or lower balance, those unplanned things that are going to come out of your reserve, all of a sudden you have a hot water tank that starts to leak and it has to be relined or replaced. You didn't plan for it until much later. If it happens on the same year that you're expending the majority of your reserve fund, you may be well eating into that balance. Or if you go to tender for that big project and you were a little bit off on those estimates, it's COVID year and everything costs more. Lumber is through the roof. You're going to find that your tender comes in much higher than you thought. And if you cannot now expend more than that critical balance, you're at zero. So it depends what you're doing. It depends what kind of project you're doing. It depends what's left and what kind of common elements you have to take care of. If you're doing pumps and boilers and hot water tanks, that kind of stuff, these unforeseen things or unplanned things happen more often than if you're a condominium that has mostly, roofing that has already been done and exterior fences if you're a townhome or that kind of stuff. So it very much depends on the kind of condominium.
Right. So rather than see this minimum balance as the little extra cushion that you have and you're looking at, you have to look at this as your critical safety net. I mean, that's all you have. And so, sure, nothing is planned to happen that year, or little is planned to happen, but you're again at the bottom of the wave. Okay, so that's interesting comments. Thank you so much. I think the next topic that I'm gonna tackle is, and the other thing you said yesterday, Jose, that really sort of hit home was this. Some people, they're really proud about how much they have in the reserve fund. Oh, look at that, we have a $1.7 million reserve, we're rich, we're millionaires. But it's really not how much you have, it's how much you spend. And so if you have a big balance, Jose, sometimes it means that you haven't done some of the work that needs to be done, right?
That's right.
Okay, Graham, back to you. Who does a reserve fund? No, sorry, what's the process? But very briefly, because we're behind our timing already, Graham. So what's the process to adopt a reserve fund, like the critical steps?
Okay, well, if anybody wants to see these critical steps themselves, if they're in the mood for some light reading, you can always check out Section 94 of the Condominium Act, always a good time. If you'd like to skip that, then I'll give you the quick summary. Is that the baseline we know is that the study has to be completed every 3 years. Once a study has been completed, the board has 120 days to review it and then propose a funding plan. The board then has 15 days to send that funding plan to the owners and the auditor. And then the funding plan must be implemented within 30 days of that. So a lot of dates and timelines to remember there. These will get posted. But something else that I think is worth mentioning is that the board does not necessarily have to adopt the proposed funding plan in the reserve fund study. But if it is looking to change up the funding plan and do something else, it has to explain this to the owners and explain in detail what the differences are from what it's proposing versus what was proposed to it. And it's very important to keep in mind for any boards that are looking at doing this, that Section 37 of the Act says that normally board members are protected from personal liability if they follow the advice of experts. But in this circumstance, if you're going to deviate from what's been proposed, you could be potentially opening yourself up to liability in that sense.
Okay. And so just to be clear, David, when you're done your work, you are going to provide my condo corporation with the reserve fund study. There's a report, there's the spreadsheet, and you are going to provide me with a funding plan, are you not?
That's correct. And we typically try to do that a month and a half before fiscal year end, if not before. That gives the board enough time to kind of finalize it. And then the 30-day window for them to, if fiscal year ends December 31st, then you need to send something out early start of December to your owners, if not before that. And budgeting obviously happens in November, probably is when you're finalizing it. So that's when the condo board will want to, you should know when your fiscal year end is. The engineer will need to know that as well.
Right. And so a very good point you raise about how you have to sort of time all of that with your own sort of budget, because one of the expenses in the budget is how much we're going to have to pay into the reserve fund this year coming up. And so for me to know that, I need to have the funding plan and the reserve fund study done. And then I'll be able to sort of put that in my line item. The reserve fund appropriation is going to be whatever amount. Okay. So one of the questions, and maybe we should have done that a bit earlier, is who can do reserve fund studies? And so first, Graham, in 10 seconds, there's a list. So take it away.
I think it's probably easiest to focus on who can't do a reserve fund study. Who can do it is pretty much who you'd expect. There's a list in the Condominium Act's regulations in Section 32, but generally it's those who you think would be there: appraisers, architects, engineers, certified reserve planners, quantity surveyors, architectural technologists, and the like. I think what's more interesting is who cannot do the reserve fund study. And so that is any directors, officers, or managers of the condo corporation, anyone with an interest in a contract or proposed contract with one of the directors or officers, the directors or officers' family, their spouse or children. You can't have your husband or wife doing the reserve fund study for your condo if you were a director there. None of the owners at the corporation are permitted to do the reserve fund study. And likewise, anyone who lives on the property managed by the corporation. So I suppose that would be tenants. Or I guess, someone like a child who lives with an owner who's not necessarily the unit's owner.
Okay, so I guess, Claudia, you're off the hook. Managers don't get to do this. So now...
Well, I guess you could do it for another building if you were so inclined, but I want to leave it to the professionals.
Yeah, don't do it. Okay, so fantastic. So that's easy. And so a sort of spin-off or a follow-up question to this will be this. So most of us will go and we'll get our engineers to do it. How often should we change engineers? Is it like, should we stick with the same engineer? Do we have an exclusive relationship with them, or are we non-exclusive and we should spice things up? So maybe, I don't know, Jose, if you want to tackle this, the benefits of sticking with the same in your view?
I think there's definitely benefits to staying with the same engineering firm because they have the knowledge of your building. They've definitely done a class 1. They've reviewed all of your documentation. They've opened all the doors and removed all the screws, as you were saying. They've looked at everything. They have a good amount of intimate knowledge about your site. You lose that if you change engineering firms. You have to start all over again. So it's a longer process, and you lose some of the corporate memory of what has happened. If they were involved in your projects, if they've done your podium repair or your garage repair, your roof repair, they know all the little things that they found and how things are interconnected. You would lose access to that information if you were to leave. That said, it does happen that for a variety of reasons, boards decide they want to move on and see a fresh set of eyes on things. So a fresh set of eyes sometimes finds things that you had not noticed and then you hadn't seen. So there's benefits in both, but I think unless someone really is playing themselves off the team, there's really a good reason to stay with the person who knows your building best.
Anything to add, Claudia, to this? Pros or cons?
I would like to add that at times the board of directors are looking to for a set as it was said, a set fresh of eyes. However, considering that when you're moving to a new engineer, there is an additional cost because the new engineer is always going to start with the class 1 reserve fund study and starts to know your building. It takes time to develop that relationship. And always it is good to develop a relationship where the engineer knows you can pick up the phone as a property manager and ask your engineer, I have this problem, which direction you recommend to go, what you recommend to do, and that engineer is a call away. When changing, that is not necessarily available right away until that new engineer starts to know the property, starts to know what is happening. So it's always best to keep with the same engineer. That being said, at times engineers jump ship, just like property managers. And it is always good to keep the company if possible, because all that information is still maintained. If that relationship with the particular engineer is that strong, then it's worth changing. Otherwise, keep your engineer. They know your site. They know how to help your manager. They know how to help your project, and they can give good information and good advice.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say maybe I'm going to be on the other team, and I'm going to say some of the benefits maybe to changing engineers. And we purposely didn't really ask these questions to David because, of course, David, you want us to stay with you and be exclusive, and then it would kind of be a bit of an odd question to ask, although maybe you do have views. I'm not sure you'll share them. We'll see that. But so in my case, I find that the few times we've changed providers for my condo corporation where I live, oddly enough, the new provider would discover assets or may discover assets that had been overlooked for a certain period of time. This year, we've, for the first time, realized that we needed to budget for the repairs of a rooftop deck. It's a private exclusive use common element where I've never seen it. I've never been invited there. And so suddenly 17 years into the existence of the building, I mean, the owner said, well, is somebody going to sort of paint this and look at this? And so, I mean, all the prior reserve fund study providers hadn't picked up on it. And so, David, any views on whether we should date exclusively or whether we should spice things up?
Rod, I always recommend dating exclusively, but but I think that, like others have said, there are some benefits for us. Even this afternoon, I was talking to a colleague and we were trying to interpret, we're inheriting a past reserve fund study and starting afresh our company. And there are some elements in it that we are confused by. We've asked the property manager, what did you spend this $250,000 on in, it says roofing, in 2016? And they said, well, actually, we don't really know what we spent $250,000, and it's a large townhouse complex. And so, unfortunately, that historic knowledge of, was that 10 units, was that 50 units of townhouse complex roof repaired? Other example is, I've seen some past reports that we've inherited that just says sealant, $100,000. Well, how much sealant did you replace for $100,000? Was that all of the window perimeters and door perimeters, or was that just one drop of your 15 drop condominium? So it depends, I would say, and there are good reasons to switch. There are great reasons to stay.
Okay, perfect. Another very timely question is, how much time do we have to top up the reserve fund? Because it seems that every time at my condo anyways, every time we do a reserve fund study, it seems like, well, we need to catch up a bit. We're not exactly, something costs more money. The work in the garage costs a bit more money. And so sometimes we need to top up. And so how much time do we have to catch up? I mean, if it's a small amount, it's easy-ish, I guess, but sometimes some corporations have to, there's a significant shortfall. And so maybe, Graham, do you want to tell us what the Act says? And then after that, we'll see whether there's any wiggle room here.
Well, according to the Condominium Act and its regulations, whenever the board has a future funding plan based on a reserve fund study, that plan needs to make sure that the fund will have enough money in it in the fiscal year following the fiscal year in which the reserve fund study is completed. So basically, you need to make sure that you have enough money in the next year.
Right. And so sometimes, as I said, I mean, if you suddenly need to catch up, you need to plop $100,000 or 150,000 or more. I mean, that's a lot to pay up front. And so I think that other legal minds, what we do, we kind of have a look at the adequate funding, at the concept of adequate funding. And so the strictest reading of the section, Graham, that you've shown us says you got to top it up within a year. But a more liberal reading or more flexible reading would give 3 years to catch up. And the reason why it's 3 years is because that's you're within the reserve fund study period cycle. You got to catch up before you do the next one. You can't possibly plan having to catch up at the next reserve fund study update. If you're planning
when there won't be one for another couple of years.
Right. If your plan is, I will already be in the red next time we do a reserve fund study update, that is not providing for adequate funding. So you have to do it, in our view, within that 3 years at the most. I don't know what's your take, David, if you see it done differently in the field. Do you guys have a magic way of doing this?
No magic way. We also provide those kind of two scenarios. One where it's a 1 year increase right now, you need to jump up, let's say 15%, or then we can take that 15% and say, if you spread it out and do 5% in 2022, 5% in 2023, and 5% in 2024, most boards opt for option 2, obviously. I have heard that others have tried to stretch out to 5 years timeline, or even 6 or 7, but that's something I'm not comfortable with. 3 years would be our max.
Anything to add, Jose or Claudia?
That's what we're typically seeing as well. It's a common practice in the industry. It'll be spread over the current period of the reserve fund study. So for 3 years, I've not seen it go beyond that, and I would not be comfortable with that either.
Okay, and so we've already covered the minimum balance, and so I'd like to hear what the panelists have to say about what's the best way to prepare for the reserve fund study. What's the best way for directors to prepare? What's the best way for managers to prepare? What's the best way for engineers to prepare? Jose, I'm going to give you the directors chapter. What's the best way? What are your tricks? And Claudia will tackle the manager's perspective. So what should directors do in preparation for this reserve fund study exercise?
Well, for directors, it'll start with receiving a proposal for engineering services. So it'll be approving a proposal and giving direction that it start. If you have directors who have been very involved in overseeing management activities, or who have a lot of the corporate knowledge, if you have a newer manager who doesn't have all of this experience with your building, then the directors become, that role is very important. But it's basically about preparing yourself, preparing your information for to turn over to the engineer. So getting your financial documents in line, getting your notes together. If you've kept, if you don't have a specific file for the reserve engineer, then you're going to have to go back through a couple of sets of AGMs and minutes and try to tabulate everything you've spent. Probably you've kept a good record of all that kind of stuff. So it's really about just getting yourself prepared, opening your mind. If you have new directors, read that declaration. Please read the governing documents so that the engineer doesn't have to explain all this to you. be conscious and aware of what it is that you're responsible for, which elements of your condominium corporation are common elements that you're funding for repair and replacement. So it's about information, I think.
Perfect. Claudia, what would you tell your managers would be tricks of the trade to prepare for this exercise?
First thing first, know your corporation. Either be high-rise, townhouse, whatever form of corporation, know your corporation well. Walk your corporation, know what works, know what doesn't. Have that conversation with your board of directors at the board meetings. Have a more detailed discussion at each annual budget. Simply not just include in the annual budget the contribution as per the reserve fund study, and have the conversation with the board of directors well in advance. Prepare the board of directors on the project. Know what projects are coming up, and have that conversation on the financials. At the time when the reserve fund study is done, that is a joint effort. It's not only, well, David, you're it. You go out there and give me the reserve fund study. I'll just drop it in the lap of the board of directors, get the approval, and moving on. You have to know the projects. You have to know when about they are to be done, and have that conversation with the engineer to give the board of directors accurate information, up to date, well in advance of the reserve fund study. When the reserve fund study draft comes and the contribution is increased because of the projects that they are coming up, or the increase in the cost of the project, the board of directors shouldn't have a heart attack and say, well, the property manager is no good, the engineer is no good, next. And then is when they're changing property management and engineers. So it requires a lot of work and a lot of knowledge on part of the manager. We're not the professionals. We do not want to do the reserve fund study, but we want to work with the board and with the engineer to have a good working document. It is very important to have that document on your desk, refer to it, know when things are needed to be done, and have that conversation with the board and your engineer.
You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Okay,
Exactly.
well done. David, we're running out of time, but what would be either a pet peeve of yours or something you wish directors and managers did differently? How can they help you help them, David?
Two things, one at the start of a project and one at the end of the project. One at the start, fill out the questionnaire, talk to your engineer and tell them, work with your property manager to indicate whether you are a condo that wants the high-end finishes, you want your lobby and your corridors refreshed in a timely manner, or whether you are on maybe the average market, or if you're more modest, kind of on the lower end, because the timing like that is relatively discretionary. How often does your carpet or your painting need to be redone? I think some items like that should be discussed, especially upfront. And then at the end of a project, it's important when you're having a discussion with the engineer reviewing the draft copy of the reserve fund study report that you've received, that you don't go into line by line by lines. The example Rod put up at the start of this, it's a spreadsheet that's probably 50 to 70 items long. The intention in that meeting is not to go through all 70. When a board member says, let's talk about this $10,000 expenditure in 2045, I just say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to look at maybe any project greater than $500,000, but the intention is not for us to do a deep dive, to use Rod's phrase, into all of the small different pump repair costs or makeup air unit small little repairs.
Okay, something else. We're running out of time, but we're going to have a reserve fund study part 2. But let me ask you this: what happens when we don't agree with the engineer? Obviously, initially we say, yeah, do this, yes, everybody's excited. It's just, but then eventually we see the price tag attached to it. And so who decide what goes in the reserve fund study? David?
Ultimately, the engineer decides. They are the author of the report. So that person who's signing off and providing you the notice of future funding, it's their insurance that is covering that to state. So they need to be comfortable. What I am most comfortable adjusting is the discretionary items, paint, carpet, things like that. What I'm not comfortable adjusting without doing an investigation or having a report to back it up is changing important components like the waterproofing in a parking garage, the roofing, the window replacement, components like that. So is there latitude? Yes, there is latitude. Do you have to, for example, a townhouse complex, do you have to every single time remove the entire thickness of 3 to 4 inches of asphalt, or can you just do what's called a shave and pave and just remove the top surface and then pave that bit, and then the next time come in and actually get down and do some of the granular base material? So there's latitude, yes. And I think part of that first questionnaire understanding is, what type of condo do you desire to be? Do you desire to be one that is spending premium top dollar and the condo fees is less of a concern, or are you wanting to keep the fees as low as reasonably possible?
Speaking of shave and pave, I'm going to put again the link for Jose's Movember mustache campaign. So feel free to go and give her a little push. How many, David, how many versions are a healthy number of versions? At which point do you kind of think that you're trying to be, that the board is maybe trying to woodshed you into giving an opinion that you don't have?
I would say two versions is typical: the draft, and then a meeting with the board, and then a final. Sometimes there's a draft number 2, and then the final. I would say if it gets any more beyond that, Jose, I think one time, Jose, how many did you say you've seen?
I've seen 8.
Yeah,
8
that's ridiculous.
drafts. We had the poor man in tears. Well, we didn't, but the board had the poor man in tears. It was absurd.
The last thing I'm going to say about the number of a version, or where the board could have a different opinion, they shouldn't. But your option as a board, if you disagree with well, there's 2 options. If you disagree with the reserve fund study provider, one of them is to get another one, and then hopefully you'll realize that really that is truly the picture. But a board, as Graham indicated, could adopt a funding plan that is different from the funding plan that is being proposed. But why would you do that? Why would you go against the recommendation from your experts? You're protected under the Condominium Act if you, in fact, rely on the advice of your professionals. You are no longer protected if you decide to go on your own advice. So, but that is where there's a bit of a wiggle room. But there is a healthy discussion to be had with the engineer. You can move some things around. Some discretionary expenses can be delayed a bit, and so on and so forth. Okay, well, we have 1 minute. And I'm going to ask you this, David. How do you get the interest rate? How do you get the inflation rate? How do you project this over 30 years?
Typically, a historic average has been used. And right now, I summarize in 1 minute. This probably is where we should start next time, Rod. What matters is the delta, the difference between interest and inflation. If you have a 2% inflation and a 2% interest, that's a 0 delta. Historically, we had 4% interest and a 2% inflation, where interest is more, and therefore the money in the bank's making more money than the cost is increasing. But we're seeing that gradually inch down, and around now a lot more, I'm seeing 0% delta. So the same interest and the same inflation.
So I'm going to do the typical Dallas sort of end of season cliffhanger. When we come back next time with you, David, my first question will be, what can I do with the surplus? And the second question will be, why is it that when I plop in my operating surplus in the reserve fund, why is it that it never seems to give me the result that I want? Why is it that when I have $150,000 up front, I don't really see the needle move a lot? But you'll have to come back at our next episode to get this answer. So let me just go around the table very quickly. We're slightly past, well, 6 o'clock now, but I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for having joined us. We obviously have big thanks, loads of gratitude to David Heska from WSP. I mean, you did all the heavy lifting. You made it sound easy and simple. So thank you for that. And we'll invite you again, fear not. Thank you to Claudia Demarin from First Service Residential. I realized that there wasn't a lot of limelight to share, but that's because we had David doing all the heavy lifting. But thank you very much for the perspective from a manager. And big thanks to José Deslongchamps of Des Services, who did a fantastic job at demystifying some of these notions behind a reserve fund study. And big thanks to the twin, the single only twin, Graham McPherson from Gowling WLG, your favorite condo lawyer out there. A quick reminder, folks, if you haven't bought your poppy yet, go and get a poppy. I don't have a poppy right now. I've been embarrassed for the last 59 minutes without a poppy. I've looked everywhere for a poppy and I can't find it, but I've bought a virtual poppy. If you go to mypoppy.ca, you can buy a virtual poppy, you can dedicate it to someone, and you can show your support for those who were there for you and for everybody else around, people that served in peace and war and people that paid a far too heavy price for our peace in Canada. So mypoppy.ca is a good place to go get your poppy. And I'm gonna again encourage you, if you want to see José's mustache, I'm putting the link again. She's raising fund for a very, very good cause. Next webinar, December 1st, information will be posted on our website on the webinar tab. December is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a game show. I'm not sure how we're going to do it and what we're going to do. Last year we did Jeopardy. We may do that again. I'm not sure, but
It'll be fun, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, going to be fun. And we'll have two twins back on, and hopefully David didn't shave his beard, and the Grim will have his back on. So thank you very much, everybody. It's 6:02. We went a bit over time. It's free. And so thanks for you taking the time to be with us. Go get your poppy, mypoppy.ca, and we will see you next month on December 1st.